I have been looking forward to this conversation for a long time because, let's be honest, so many of us are walking around confused, frustrated, and completely disconnected from our own health. We are told things are quote unquote normal, even when we're dealing with debilitating periods, brain fog, burnout, or hormone swings that make us feel like strangers in our own bodies. And it's not because we're broken. It's because the system was never designed to teach us about our bodies, let alone support us through the hormonal changes we experience throughout life. The truth is, most of us have been trained to put our trust in doctors who were never given the full story on women's health in the first place. And while I don't believe that most practitioners are trying to do harm, there is a glaring gap in the education, research, and resources when it comes to women's bodies. That's why I am so excited to have Nicole Jardim on the podcast today. If you've been in the hormone space for more than 5 minutes, you've probably come across her work. She's helped thousands of women make sense of their cycles, understand what's actually going on in their bodies, and reclaim their hormone health in a way that's clear, grounded, and totally empowering. Nicole Jardim is a certified women's health coach and the author of the book Fix Your Period, a 6-week program to banish bloat, conquer cramps, manage moodiness, and ignite lasting hormone balance. Her life-changing program empowers women to reclaim their hormone health with a natural step-by-step approach addressing everything from PMS to missing periods. She's also the creator of the Fix Your Period Collective, which is where she provides personalized hormone support and education, and is the founder of the Institute of Menstrual Health, where she trains health practitioners around the world through her Women's Hormone Health Certification Program, one that I have been so blessed to be a part of and to be certified in. Nicole also hosts the Period Party podcast and has co-authored the Happy Balanced Recipe book and has been featured in major publications like The Guardian, Well and Good, Mind Body Green, and Healthline. All right, let's dive in. This is going to be such a great conversation, and I cannot wait for you to hear it. Welcome back. I am so excited that you have joined me again in the Aligned Womb, Aligned You podcast. I'm Kate Nagai, and I am your host and womb guide on this journey. I'm here to help you to lean into the language of your menstrual cycle so that you can align yourself and awaken and activate to your womb wisdom to live the most inspired life. I am so excited to jump into this episode and to dive into today's topic. So let's get started. Welcome, Nicole, to the podcast. I am so excited to have you here. And I am ready and excited to dive in to today's topic, a conversation that may bring up a lot of emotions for women, a large range of emotions, because we're going to go against the grain a little bit here. And we're going to talk about things that I don't know if necessarily are talked a lot on public platforms, at least I haven't yet. But one thing that kind of broke me out of my shell and was ready to talk about this on a public platform and not just with girlfriends behind closed doors is in your program, because I just did your certification program, and you had asked us what we're most afraid of as practitioners. And I said mine is that my knowledge will be discredited because I'm not a physician, that I'm not a medical doctor. And I don't remember if it was you or Adele, one of you said, like, this is the time, right? Like, thank God we're not, because medical community is not really taught how to support women. We're not there yet. And this is why this program exists. And this is why we're creating health practitioners or hormone health practitioners. So that way we have people who understand the female body. And so we're going to dive into that conversation today. What is
Here we
missing in the
are.
medical world?
Yes, I love that we're having this conversation, by the way, because I've probably talked about this so many times over the last decade, and to see you come out of your shell and speak about this taboo, I feel like it is a taboo topic,
Mm-hmm.
or a topic that feels scary or hard to talk about is amazing to me. Just
Yay!
so glad that we're doing this.
So maybe to start off, we can share a little bit about your story because you didn't just stumble into women's health
or women's hormone health. Like this wasn't just something like you're like, I'm going to do this for a living. You went through your
No.
own journey and your own navigation of the health system in order to find your healing process, not procedure, process. So maybe you can share a little bit about what brought you here.
Yeah, for sure. It was definitely not a stumbling into this. I certainly was not like, oh yeah, I really just want to be a women's health coach when I grow up. It's so not like that.
It was never with
Uh,
school counselors. Do you want to teach about periods?
I mean,
Check.
yeah, right? Exactly. I mean, I knew nothing. It was interesting though. There were little hints that this might be something I would do, and never again, never would I have believed it. And it was, when I was about to get my period, like I remember being like it was about just I got it when I was 12 and I was just a little bit younger than that, and I remember like seeing this kind of spotting and having like pads in my backpack just to be safe and wearing a panty liner because I knew something was coming. Like I felt it. And I hadn't really had a conversation with my mom so much, but she had given me a book. And so I'd read this book, I devoured it, and I was so curious about all of this stuff. And then she took me out to lunch when I did get my period and all of that stuff. So like there was a lead up. So I definitely had intuition around it and was not caught off guard at all. And then of course a friend of mine found my pads in my backpack, and she was like, do you have your period? As if I'd like completely abandoned her and misled her into believing that I did not have a period as yet. It was hilarious. So yeah, I feel like there was, and I think we all have that. I think there is this intuition, but we're so afraid. It's still sort of this taboo topic. So many of us just sort of push it down and we just ignore the changes that are happening in our bodies. And then about 2 or 3 years after getting my first period, I things had really sort of gone downhill for me. And so I remember having like extremely heavy periods, really painful periods, and they just got progressively worse over time. And then they became extremely irregular. And when you have a mother who was in bed for 2 to 3 days out of every month because of her period pain, you're not going to get any help. Because she was like, well, this is all normal to me, right? I don't know anything different. And so ultimately, this went on for years. And I finally decided to go and see her gynecologist. And she was the one who had said, oh, yeah, you can just go on the pill. And so I thought, well, everyone else is on the pill. So I kind of want to be on the pill too. And so that's kind of how that happened. So I ended up on the pill without her really asking any questions at all. And I thought, this was incredible. I finally have a light period that comes every 28 days that is causing me debilitating pain. And I'm not the girl, wearing a pair of shorts underneath my school uniform because I'm so terrified of leaking through it, or the girl who is at the sleepover at friends' houses and her mother's putting a towel down on the mattress. It's just like mortifying. Teenager life is hard enough as it is. So those were all just like really excruciating things that were happening to me. And so this changed everything. And so I thought, well, now I'm never coming off the pill because it's created this super light period. And I just thought I had found my silver bullet. Ultimately, I ended up with pretty much all the side effects one might have while on the pill. So it's just like, shoot, okay, I have not found my solution. And so ultimately, I ended up coming off of it about 4 years after starting it because I had, hair loss. I had developed this melasma all over my face. A doctor was like, well, I only see that in pregnant women. Not sure why that's happening to you. There were a lot of those moments for me. I've never seen that before. And I had gut health issues and joint pain, and I was constantly sick. It was horrible. So I had UTIs and yeast infections too, which was really bad, as I just felt like my body was completely falling apart. And when I look back at the trajectory, I did not have these kinds of issues prior to being on the pill. So clearly, we can see what it does. We can see what it does to your immune system, to your hormone levels, obviously, to your gut health, to your mineral balance, and the breakdown that ensued. And so at after 4 years of this, I decided I couldn't take it anymore, and I went and saw an acupuncturist. This was after ending up in the ER because I had an allergic reaction to UTI medication. It's just like, go figure. And so I went and saw this acupuncturist, and that was really what set me on this path because he was the first person out of all these doctors I'd seen that said, you might be having a problem with the pill. And I didn't believe him. I thought he was crazy. And that was really what was the catalyst for all of this work. Suddenly I started feeling better. I did come off the pill eventually after working with him for a little bit, and things really started to shift. And then suddenly this was the work that I thought I wanted to do. I had no experience whatsoever, didn't know what I was going to do, but fast forward many years and I now do the work that I do, but it was quite a long, harrowing journey. I'll
Yeah.
say that.
And I find that so many of us, and this is what I see as the trend, is that so many of us, something's going wrong in our body. We have this health crisis. We go to get help. We don't receive it. And then we go, there has to be a better way. At least that was my story. There has to be a better way. Then for me, it was they're just going wanting to remove body parts. And I was like, hold up. Before we look at surgery, can we like explore? And they had nothing to give me. And then that's when I went down the crazy rabbit hole of like, let's try Reiki, let's try acupuncture. Like I never did any of these things. And I totally healed my body and didn't have to go to surgery. Right. And like this is what blew my mind and what like was a light bulb for me of like there has to be something other than what we're being taught by or what we're receiving from medical professionals. Not to say that they don't have their place, but when it comes to women's health, they don't provide many options. And the
No.
I don't knows are quite high.
Yeah, it is so unfortunate. And I talk about this a lot because I feel that it's important to say that it's really by design at the end of the day. And the system has been set up to not look at our bodies in a holistic way whatsoever. And as a result, we end up having these chronic issues that, problems that can be addressed initially that then become chronic because we're not utilizing the right tools. So yeah, I completely get that. Whether it's the pill or an IUD or some kind of surgery, like you said, you didn't need to go down that path at all. And
Yeah.
and nobody, but none of us know. We don't even have the wherewithal to know that we can ask the questions that you were asking. And so that
Mhm.
I think is an inherent problem. And I think so much of it stems from the fact that this is just systemic, right? We have long deprioritized education and and research and policy, and so as a result, this is where we find ourselves now.
Well, and I'm curious too, and I don't know if you have the answer to this. Like we know if we look at the history of medicine, it was very much built on a patriarchal system. It was a boys' club. Like it was, the research was backed by, studying on male mice. And like, has that education part of the system changed at all? Like we know that we keep always saying like research isn't there, doctors aren't getting the information or they don't have the time for the information, but is the schooling like where they first get integrated into their career path? Is there any pressure per se on them changing the way that they approach teaching medicine?
Yes and no is what I think. I do think that we're in a moment of awakening. Um, when I think back to when I started doing this work, I mean, I first did a professional training in 2010, and there was absolutely nothing out there. I mean, I felt like I had to convince women that there were other things you could do. I had to convince them of it. Now I think that it's pretty common knowledge that there are other options
Mhm.
aside from taking a birth control pill. Not everyone sees that, but I think it generally has become more mainstream. And so I think now more than ever, there is pressure, I suppose you could say, like what you just said there, um, to shift because women are demanding answers. They are demanding better of their healthcare providers. And so I think that that's part of why more practitioners are specializing in women's health, and more companies are creating better tools. So there is certainly a shift that has occurred. Um, And when I think about like just the rise of functional medicine, I mean, that really wasn't even a term 15 years ago. And obviously that, is rooted in naturopathic medicine, and then there's integrative medicine. So there are, I mean, so many more practitioners who are doing this kind of training and integrating this kind of work into their practices. So that's amazing. We've got the femtech space as well, where, we're seeing the amount of technology that is stepping in to address so many of these huge holes that we have in women's health. So I think that there are really big shifts happening, and yet at the same time, from my understanding, the training in traditional healthcare, like traditional medical schools, hasn't really changed that much. There is still not uh, access to root cause analysis and various other tools that I think should be part of medicine, generally speaking. Like if you're going to the doctor, uh, you want them to investigate why you're experiencing what you're experiencing, and I think that that's still is still very much in its infancy. Maybe that
Yeah.
will shift. I'm not entirely sure, but there's that, and then also access, right? This is incredibly uneven, right? Not everyone can afford functional medical doctors or testing or the holistic care that is involved in getting better in from, like I said, a root cause perspective. And so we still see so many women not being able to get that care, and also being dismissed and or being told by their doctors that everything's normal, or this might just be in your head, you maybe have invented this, this might be a feeling that you have, but it's not backed up by any research or science. So so basically that doesn't count. And so when we don't
Mhm.
fit into the system's narrow definitions of health, we find ourselves kind of shut out, and that's really unfortunate. But I feel like it's definitely a yes and no answer.
Mhm. I know that in your program you had, I believe her name was Kira Sutherland. Is that right? Dr. Kira Sutherland?
Yes, yeah,
Yes.
she's not a doctor, but yes, Kara
Okay.
Sutherland.
Okay,
Yes,
Kira
yes.
Sutherland. She had come on and she was talking about how even with research, like one of the big problems is testing on female mice because often like the whole thought behind it is that it's too hard to test on female mice because of the cycle, right? Because if we have irregular cycles or like how many times we actually have to test, like if we really wanted to have a good basis for research, we want to test after the period when estrogen is low. We want to test close to ovulation when hormones are a little bit higher and or not a little bit, a lot higher. And then we want to test in luteal phase when estrogen's low and progesterone is high, right? So we want to see this full scope. But when it comes to testing, that can get costly.
Yeah.
When we really want to see the full scope of what's happening and how it applies to women's health, we do have to do a way more thorough approach. And it makes it complicated because especially if you throw in irregular cycles or pregnancy or like all these other perimenopause, like you throw in these other conditions and we're just keeping layering onto that research. But is there a way, do you think, in your mind, and I know that we're not there yet, but do you think that there is a way potentially in the future that we can have some kind of better system that's taking all of these factors into consideration?
Well, yes. I mean, I feel like we do, right? But as you just said, there is the financial component to it. And so, yes, I believe that we're moving in that direction. As we were saying earlier, right? The women's health generally has been deprioritized in medical research and education and in policy and all of that. But the we are moving in the right direction. I mean, it is quite shocking when you look at the stats on that. It wasn't until 1993, at least in the US, that women were required to be in medical studies, and then it wasn't until 2015 that the scientists who were conducting those studies actually had to show what the drug or whatever it was that was being studied what actually did to that female body, which is mind-boggling, right? Because that was 10 years ago. And so, yes, like there is so much that we're playing catch up on in understanding, pretty much everything from women's physiology to how hormones impact us, how our medications affect us in comparison to men. So, yeah, I think there's just a huge gap there. And then I think that one of the other issues that really I think they're now just really acknowledging that really impacted us is the Women's Health Initiative and the
Hmm.
misinterpretation of those of the results of the Women's Health Initiative testing on hormone replacement therapy, and the belief at the time that estrogen replacement caused breast cancer, or at least contributed to it. And so we lost out on basically 20 years of research around this because they decided that estrogen causes breast cancer, or is a player in breast cancer, which is so crazy when you actually think about it, right? Because how is that possible? Like, it's our own hormone. How is our own hormone causing breast cancer? It just doesn't make any sense ultimately. So yeah, that misinterpretation has set us back literally decades. And so now I feel like there's this mad scramble. I know you see it. I feel like we all see it,
Hmm.
where everyone and their mother is talking about perimenopause and menopause and hormone replacement. And so it's almost like the pendulum has swung completely in the other direction. And now we're massively making up for it, or trying to make up for the decades where this was not at all studied or even paid attention to. And so, yeah, and then on top of it, like you were just saying about the research default is the male body. And so we're also playing catch up in understanding that too. So it's just really it's been collectively, I think, uh for us, very damaging. And I think that there is now some degree of accountability, but I'm just not entirely sure what that's going to look like. It does feel like it
Hmm.
remains to be seen.
Well, I think it's also interesting when I look at my husband and myself, him looking at his own health issues,
Yeah.
there's no fear. Like it's like, whatever. So they told me this, right? But women, when we are given a diagnosis or when we're told something, when we get data, we do go into a fear. We do go into that panic. And I think sometimes it feels like the modern approach to medicine just really enables that fear within us that, like you said, like estrogen's going to give you is going to give you cancer, right? And like
Yeah.
this it's now ingrained, like even though we've now know that that research was misinterpreted. I just did an event where that was something that kept coming up of women going, yeah, but there was that study. It's like, yeah, but they're just not really willing to let go of that fear of like, maybe this might still happen, right? And I think part of that is what plays into us becoming very dependent on the advice we're given by our medical professionals, and why we kind of see them as like the the gods of our health, right? If we want to put it that way, because we've been trained and taught that they are the authority in this area. And they are an authority in the sense that they paid for their education, they went to the schooling, but we know that science changes so rapidly, right? Like what we know, and this is what medicine is that it's based on science, but science is always evolving. It's always changing and there's always new discoveries. So what was true yesterday is not going to be true tomorrow in some senses.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah, there's this, and then there's also this cultural layer, for generations, and not necessarily so much in this society, but in so many others. I mean, this one it does exist too, but it's exponentially worse in other more conservative cultures. When you think about menstruation and perimenopause and menopause, we think about fertility struggles, or postpartum struggles. These are topics that have traditionally been considered private, taboo, not things we talk about openly. And that silence has gotten passed down as well through generations. And so many of us grew up without the language to describe what we're experiencing, and we don't have, or we didn't have, the role models who could really guide us through this. And so I think that that has also really informed how the medical system deals with women's health challenges as well.
Hmm.
Yeah.
My daughter, like we talk very openly in this house
Oh, I have
about
no doubt about
periods,
this.
about hormones. And so funny, my 9-year-old was explaining to my 5-year-old all about the uterus, and he was like, "Well, I want a uterus." I was like, "See, I'm doing a good job. I'm doing a good job at my work here." But we talk quite openly, and it's for us, it's like the period isn't a scary thing, right?
Right.
Like understanding that you're four different versions with four different hormones, it's not a scary thing. But my daughter, my oldest, who is 11 now, in her health class, they started going through sex ed, and she came home and she's, I'm actually now scared of the period. And I was like, what are you talking about in schools that like all this work I've done for 11 years is
I
now
cannot believe
gone.
this. Like she goes to one health class and suddenly, or a few, and suddenly after everything you've done, she's scared.
She's
It just
scared
drives me nuts. I
about
can't believe
bleeding again.
this.
And I'm just like,
Yeah. What did they
here we
say?
go.
Was there something specific that she said that freaked her out?
I think it's just that it's too scientific. It's too like they try to keep it anatomical because they don't want they're trying to meet the requirements but not share too much information because certain parents don't want so much information because you can't really talk about periods and having a period without talking about sex education, and at 11 is that too early? Like it's all of those factors played in that I think they try to keep it so rigid that it becomes too clinical, and they take the emotion out of it. They take like the magic and the beauty out of like what's happening. And I think it's just how, at least from our perspective in Canada, I think it's just so clinical that they come in with that scary, it feels like a doctor's office in a school. And it's,
Yeah, it's the same here. I
yeah,
mean, I think it's, I don't know the exact stats. I remember I memorized it a long time ago and now it's kind of fuzzy in my head, but it's about 25 states that require sex education. The others don't.
yeah,
And of those 25, I think in 21, it's not required that in the teachings that they be accurate, that it be biologically accurate sex education. And then of all of them, I think it's a vast majority of our states we teach abstinence only sex education.
hmm,
So there is, it's very varied, obviously, but very similar in that it is very clinical. It's based on what I consider to be outdated information.
yeah,
So, right. And so if you're a parent who struggled with all of this growing up and you decided you didn't want anything to do with this, which I see so many women are like that. They're like, I don't know anything about this. I don't really care. Then your daughter is now going to get this same outdated information, and we can continue to perpetuate the cycle. This is not me blaming anybody, but I'm just saying, like, this is what I
yeah,
witness happening. And so, and I get it, like I get, because when something feels hard and scary and gross, quite frankly, you just kind of like, I don't want to deal with this. And so I understand that completely. I was one of these people, so I definitely get it. But I just feel as though the information is completely outdated. Like you said, it's so clinical, so it feels totally scary. And there absolutely is a way to talk about all of this in an age appropriate way for 11-year-olds or 10-year-olds who are starting to go through all of these changes and
yeah,
in an empowering way.
yeah.
But we haven't quite figured that out in the education system as yet.
Well, it's really interesting because I do have a colleague who's out of Wales, and she got a contract with a school to come in and teach sex ed from a menstrual cycle awareness perspective. So teaching more of kind of like not the clinical part, but more of like we're four different phases. They're like the seasons outside, and they separate it so that it was only for the girls and the boys were out. But then what they noticed is that all the boys were curious. They're like, what are you guys learning about? So they asked her to come in and do the exact same teaching, but for the boys without the girls in the class so that they could ask more of those questions as well and not have the embarrassment factor. But they did the whole like pad thing and the tampon thing, and they talked about the women's cycle and the four different seasons. And so she now does that in the school systems in Wales, where she teaches the girls from like more of this spiritual, energetic perspective, and then she teaches the boys. And I was like, this is what we need. Like, there's a place for it to be clinical, but I think there's also a place for us to show like how there is a different way to exist than the 24-hour clock, right?
Right. Yes.
And
Yes,
so,
I completely agree with you. And I so commend her because that's a perfect example of what we're seeing when I said that, when you mentioned are things really changing, and I feel like it's a yes and no answer because we're really in that moment of awakening like I was
mhm,
mentioning, and that's what is happening. And so a lot of women are having these experiences, and deciding to do something about it. And so we're seeing so many more conversations about these topics that just did not exist before. And one of that, she's a perfect example of that. And it's really great to see because I think that that's happening a lot more. Like women are having period parties for their daughters, and all of these more ritualistic practices exist now that I think were very much on the fringe or just did not at all exist even a
Mhm.
decade or two ago.
Well, and I think the conversation's becoming more normalized as well,
Mm.
that men are now also being brought into that conversation. So, like in our home, my husband, he may not know the exact terms of luteal and follicular, but he does know that this isn't just an erratic Kate that came out of nowhere. It's like, oh, this is after ovulation. Like after she liked me for a week, now, she's got some boundaries and she wants me to do the dishes on time and like there's a little less giveaway, right? And so he gets that. But even as I'm entering perimenopause in my 40s, like just the other day, I was running around doing errands and he called me with just two simple questions. And I was driving and I was like, I can't answer questions right now. And he's like, but they're simple. I'm like, not for my brain. Like, can we just let me pull over and I'll call you back? Because it was too much, right? But it wasn't me being cranky. It's that he now understands that my brain's operating a little bit differently than it did in my 30s.
Yes. Wow. Does it ever?
Yeah.
Everything feels so much more overwhelming.
Yes.
Like, yes, even with hormone replacement therapy, I'm still amazed by how much more sensitive I think I am now to external stimuli than I ever was before.
But men are curious. They want to know too. And I don't think it's like what it was with my dad, where it was like, can we not talk about that, please? Right?
Yes.
Where now
Yes.
it's just an open conversation. And I think that's great for younger generations to see too and witness that it doesn't have to be this private conversation.
Oh, absolutely. It really doesn't. I think just setting the example of being open about it is an invitation pretty much to everyone around you and in your life, to have a conversation, even if it's kind of uncomfortable, or even if it's just like a one sentence thing. I mean, when I was writing my book, we were staying with Hayden's brother and his wife and their three sons who were all like preteen and teen ages at that time. And it was sort of the tail end, and we moved out of our apartment. We were going to go travel. Pre-pandemic when we had big plans, and so we were just staying with them in the interim before we went traveling. And it was like the tail end of writing this book, and Matthew, my youngest nephew, was just hilarious. He asked me a million questions, and I think that kids are so curious at that age, and boys are too, of course. But he asked me so many questions. I have the most hilarious videos of him like laying on the couch, just like with my book open, and he's reading these sentences that make absolutely no sense to him whatsoever. But he was fascinated by all of this. And we still have conversations. I saw him on Sunday, and he's now 18. He was like, so how's the book going? So I really do think that there is room for these conversations with boys and with men. I think there's so much that we don't know and they don't know as well. And I
Mhm.
desperately think that I think they desperately want to know how they can support the women in their life better and understand them better, and they're not just shutting down now, whereas before it was like, oh, she's acting crazy, I'm just going to leave the house kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I think that that is certainly shifted, which is nice.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about when the system starts to fail us. So
Oh,
we
yes.
know that the system is clearly failing many women right now. And many women are walking out of their appointments with doctors feeling dismissed, gaslit, or left alone with absolutely no answers after their 15 minutes of a session.
Yeah.
So where do these people begin? Like, what are the first steps women can take when they're trying to reclaim their health and they're feeling completely lost and unheard?
Yes, I think that, you and I have both gone through this, so I feel as though we have a pretty good handle on what the process is. And I also really recognize that when you're in the beginning stages of this, you're kind of doing what we define as insanity, which is continuing to go back to your doctor, hoping that you're going to get a different outcome. And I did that for multiple years, which is why I can talk about it and kind of laugh about it now because it's ridiculous when you really reflect on it. And I will just say, from my perspective, I went to many different doctors while I was dealing with all these side effects from the pill because they felt so unrelated. You know, I had these skin issues, the hair was falling out. I had horrible gut health issues. I had the joint pain. My mom has rheumatoid arthritis. So I thought, oh my God, am I developing rheumatoid arthritis? So there were just so many things happening. I was, like I said, constantly sick. So I felt like I was going to the doctor all the time because I always felt like I had a cold or something going on. But I saw a rheumatologist. I saw multiple gut health specialists. I did a colonoscopy because they were like, well, maybe you have Crohn's disease, you know? So it's just all of this. I went to many dermatologists. I went to my OBGYN constantly because of the yeast infections and the urinary tract infections. It was insane. And as a result, it landed me in the ER with this allergic reaction. And that was really the moment where I thought, wow, I think I have to really do something differently here. And that was, as I said, what led me down this path. And so coming back to that, like if you're in that place, I truly understand because that is what we have been told to believe, right? That this
Mhm.
particular specialist is going to fix this particular issue in my body. But what we fail to understand, or what we've really not been taught, is that this is an entirely interconnected system. And so the support that we need to seek is support that's going to support the body as a whole versus these siloed off sections of the body, right? The gut or the skin or the urinary tract or whatever with these different specialists. And so I think that that's the first thing. And, you know, this is a huge part of the work I think that you and I both do is the education piece, right? Like when the system doesn't support us, we have to start coming back to ourselves, to our own bodies. And I talk about this a lot. I mentioned this in my book many times as a sort of preface to the work that you have to do. And it's that symptoms are information, right? Your body isn't broken. It didn't just randomly decide to rebel against you. It is truly speaking to you, but it's speaking to you in a language that you don't understand because nobody ever told you anything about this language that your body talks in. And so, really, the step one that we all have to take is education. And it involves understanding your cycle, understanding your hormones, your patterns. And that's why, you know, I've created the work that I do and the platform that I have because there has to be a starting point, and that's the starting point, right? We can't really anymore, at least from what I have witnessed, talking to thousands of women and so many practitioners like you, is that if we're waiting for a doctor to validate what we already know deep down, that's a problem because it might never happen. And we have to, if something feels off, we have to take matters into our own hands. So it's about starting to track your cycle, track your symptoms, understand where in your cycle they're showing up. What does your period look like? Is it heavy? Is it regular, irregular? How long does it last for? Or is it just like some spotting and it just barely exists? Do you know if you're ovulating? Do you know when in your cycle you're ovulating? Do you feel physical pain, like pelvic pain, at any time throughout your cycle, particularly when you get your period? Migraines, acne. There are so many symptoms that our bodies are talking to us through. And yet, again, we just don't know how to interpret them. So it's a matter of really starting with those basics. I could keep going, but I'll stop there.
Well, and I think I read this somewhere and I don't remember who I read it from, but, and I loved how they put this, that we have to remember that we are consumers of our health, right? Like
Oh,
going
yeah.
to a doctor, they're not all doctors are the same. And when you go into a doctor and you don't feel heard, you don't feel validated, they're being paid for you to be there. So if you don't like it, go and find somebody else because you are a consumer. You can, it's like trying on jeans. You don't have to buy the first pair you buy you try it on.
So
Keep
true.
trying them until you find one who really hears your concerns, who really gets it. And that might not come in the form of an MD. And, I'm like, that's where I'm always nervous of saying, like, your MD may not have the answers, but there's so many other resources. There's so many other ways, kind of like what you're talking to, Nicole, that's a full body system. And it's one thing that I loved learning from you as well is that, you know, it can be really simple. The simplest thing, I think it was just the other day in one of our sessions where we were talking about just the simple act of chewing our food better, like slowing down, chewing it properly, allowing the enzymes in the mouth to do the work, that can have profound effects on our hormones, right? So we can get
Yes.
all these fancy diagnoses, but at the end of the day, sometimes it's the simplest act, right? And so giving someone who might be able to say, I don't know yet, but here, let's start with this, can maybe have a way bigger impact than someone that says, okay, from your blood work, you've been diagnosed with this, and this is your only option.
Right. Yes. And this is the thing. And I mean, even if you get to that point, like you said, the diagnosis, that's a miracle, is what it feels like, just based on the
Yes.
conversations I've had with so many women. You're not even really getting that. And then, oh, I just read this crazy stat the other day. It was on PCOS. God, I wish I could remember the exact number, but the amount of practitioners that were interviewed or asked in this poll, how one diagnoses PCOS was abysmally low. They didn't have a full understanding of the diagnostic criteria for PCOS. And that just speaks right to what we were talking about earlier with the real lack of attention and care when it comes to women's health as a whole. And that, I think, is just, it's mind-boggling when you think about it, because PCOS is the number one endocrine disorder in the world affecting women, and it is the number one cause of ovulatory infertility. And so when we can't even diagnose properly the condition that impacts so many women on this planet, what does that say about the entire system? And what does
Hmm.
that tell us? And that immediately reduces our confidence in our doctor's ability to even give us a correct diagnosis, much less so like what you were saying when we were on our call the other day talking about the testing that we had for our mock client,
Yeah.
and you were just saying, wow, that's a lot of testing, and that's really unfortunate, right? Because as you and I both know, that was just basic testing to see
Yeah.
what's going on a pretty standard level. So such a combination of things, right? It's like the approach is all wrong, and then the diagnostic criteria is not always correct, and then the treatment options are so limited. So there are problems all along the way. That's what
Hmm.
I'm saying.
And that kind of goes into this next aspect of the conditioning that's around doctors know best. I always say that a big part of my work is helping women to unlearn the belief that their doctor knows their body better than they know their body. We have intuitive hits as to that something is wrong. And when we get advice that doesn't feel right, it's probably because it doesn't feel like it's actually attending to what it is that we're asking for. So, what are some tools or mindset shifts that you use to teach women to help them to start advocating for themselves and trusting their own body's wisdom?
This is a big one. And as you were talking, I was just thinking of so many different stories that I've, heard over the last decade. And I think that one of the things I tell my community and the women I work with over and over again is that you can respect your doctor and you can also question them. That
Hmm.
these two are not mutually exclusive. And so one of the biggest things, as I was just mentioning, right, is tracking your cycle and symptoms, because when you go into an appointment with data, you're not just, quote unquote, being emotional. I hate all of that, by the way. I'm just saying it for
Hmm.
emphasis, but you're really being informed. You're coming in there informed. And depending on the doctor, you may get a good reaction or response from your data and from your information that you have collected, or you may potentially even be ridiculed, because from their perspective, and again, this is their training, and I don't want to knock it because I understand the system. I get what is happening here. But from their perspective, they see it as, this is all useless data. This is useless information that you don't really need, because if you're just going to take a birth control pill, then you're sorting out all of these problems that you think you have. And so from their perspective, I can see how they would react in an unfavorable way. And I think that the other thing is to be asking questions. Ask why. keep digging until you get a real explanation. I had someone reach out to me the other day and she was like, I feel so desperate. I am pretty sure I have endometriosis, and all I'm being offered is the birth control pill as a starting point. I can't even get or even talk about any kind of exploratory surgery or anything like that until I go on the pill. So that's a prerequisite for taking the next steps to actually getting an endometriosis diagnosis. And she's just feeling so desperate, which I completely understand, right? When you're told repeatedly, like, this is normal, or you're just getting older, or you're just young. I mean, because we're told all the things at all the ages, or it's, you're just stressed, or you really just need to relax, or whatever. Um, or it's just period pain or whatever, then you start to lose your mind. And so I think that you have to start digging deeper. And I have tons of resources in my book. I feel like there's so much information out there
Mhm.
now that can point you in a different direction. So I think, yes, keep asking why. I also think too, getting comfortable with the idea that you may need to ask for a second opinion or go even a third opinion, is really important too, right? We do not want to put our blind trust in just anyone, because they have the word MD or the letters MD at the end of their name, or they're a specialist of some kind. Just continue using your intuition. This is the other issue that I have, that I see a lot of, and it's something that happened to me too. Remember, I mentioned, like, when I was younger and I knew my period was coming and I felt like I had it all figured out, and I felt very confident about that. And then I just remember my confidence being slowly undermined as I got older, and constantly questioning if my intuition was right. And so we all have that intuition, we all have that body wisdom, and if we tap into that, it'll give us answers, it will guide us. And I think that we tend not to, because we're putting our trust in someone who has all this education and has told us that this is what this is, and these are the solutions, or this is the treatment. And so I just think if you can just honor that, if something doesn't feel right, uh, that is going to take you a long way. No one is living in your body 24/7 but you. And so ultimately, you have to make decisions based on the feelings that you have about a particular situation, or a suggestion for a treatment, or even a diagnosis. Because oftentimes I see a lot of misdiagnoses. I've had so many clients over the years who were misdiagnosed with PCOS as teenagers, told that they're going to have problems with their fertility, or getting pregnant or having children, only to find out that really all that was androgens surging. That tends to happen when you're in puberty and as a teenager, and then their cycle regulated by the time they were 17 or 18. So it's just really, really challenging to not to go into these scenarios without the knowledge. And so I think that that's where we come back to, right? We circle back to, okay, well, what is my body doing, right? So that means staying curious, reading, listening, try not to get overwhelmed, but really just learning that this is your body, and menstrual cycles have a cadence to them, right? You don't need to be a doctor to understand your health, or to understand what's going on with your cycle. And I think that that's the other thing too, is remembering that you are indeed smart enough to know what is going on with your body, and to be able to articulate it, whether it's to a doctor or some other kind of healthcare practitioner. But most importantly, finding someone who respects you and listens to you and is willing to take what you're saying to them seriously, is to me and like a non-negotiable at this point.
Yeah, and for me, it's don't be afraid of being that squeaky wheel. Right? We
Yes.
are so taught to be the good girl, or to, mind our manners, or all these things that we were taught as little girls. And we carry that into our health care. And when we're advocating for ourselves, we're like, well, they said this, so I'll just accept it. It's like, no, be that squeaky wheel. I was working with a nutritionist who did a Dutch test, and I took the same results to my naturopathic doctor, and they both said, like, go get your testosterone tested with blood. Like, we know what it came up on the Dutch, but let's get blood work just to confirm what we think is going on. And I could not get testosterone tested because I was told it wasn't relevant to female hormones. And
The
at
fact that
the
that is
summit I
still
was at,
happening is crazy.
I
Sorry.
know. And then I was at a summit this
Ridiculous.
weekend, and another lady told me, like, yeah, she asked to get her hormones tested, and her doctor refuses to test women for testosterone. And I was like, no. So I brought a toddler in and I got my way because I don't know if it was like me being the squeaky wheel or just having a really rowdy toddler in the room that they're like, fine, here's your testosterone test. Get out of here.
So you were able to pull it off. But do you
I
see
was
the
able.
lengths that we have to go to? I mean, Kate, you know
Yes.
this. Obviously, you just have to bring your toddler in to get your testosterone tested
Yep.
because a doctor doesn't believe that testosterone is relevant to women's health, even though we have so much testosterone coursing through our veins. That
Yep.
is just, it's incomprehensible. And I think until you experience this level of gaslighting and dismissal, you can't even believe it's real. I've had this conversation with a lot of people who don't have hormone issues or health problems, and they half the time I don't even think they believe me that I've dealt with what I've dealt with. You and I know we're educated on this topic, and we still deal with all this pushback. So when you're thinking about someone who doesn't have really any background knowledge going in there hoping to get answers, like how many women say, I just really wanted to get my hormones tested, but they don't even know what hormones to get tested, which is
Hmm.
why you have to learn what hormones you need to get tested so you can go back to your doctor and say, this is why, this is what I want to get tested and why. And then, that I think that commands a little bit more respect. And then hopefully they'll work with you. But as you said too, you're a consumer of your health and you can decide who you're going to work with to address your health concerns.
Yeah. And that is breaking the norm. It can sound scary because you're gonna have your mother, your sister-in-law, you're gonna have all these people questioning, like, why won't you trust your doctor? But like
Right.
seriously, doctors don't know. And my sister-in-law, I love her to death. She's a nurse and she is 6 years older than me. And she was like, there's no way you can be in perimenopause. I'm almost 45. I was like, dude, I'm there and so are you. Because her thing is like, she's like, I'm not there. I'm like, yes, you are, love. Like, you're almost 50. You are there.
100%. I just say to
So,
everyone, listen, if you're in your 40s, you're in that perimenopausal window. Like
yeah.
just let's just call it what it is. Because
Hmm.
because guaranteed in the next couple of years, you're going to not have a period anymore. By the time you're like just a little by 50 or a little over 50. I mean, it's so rare for someone to still be cycling at 54 or 55. It rarely happens. So, yes, I agree. But so many women don't even know what perimenopause is or what that even looks like. And so they're like, I think maybe I might be, but I have no idea.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's so true.
I know.
So, to finish off today's conversation, because we've been talking a lot about medical, advocating for ourselves, I think women get a sense of like they're not being heard by their doctors sometimes, but still feeling like that's the main road to take to get our care or our hormones under control. We know that there's naturopathic doctors. We know that there's integrative medicine. We know of acupuncturists most likely. But you've also created this beautiful little course teaching women about hormones and how to be hormone health practitioners, which I think most people, I know I run into this daily, of people being like, but what is that? Like, what is a hormone health coach? And is this really something that can help me? Which like I struggle sometimes to be like, you have no idea the stuff that she taught us. Like, you have no, like, I feel like,
Yeah.
and I don't feel like I'm a doctor, but I feel like I have a good grasp on what is going on in the body from this because your course isn't just about here's your three main hormones, now go play with them. It is about, how your liver is processing things and how it's detoxifying, the importance of the gallbladder, which had no idea before your course even played a role in our hormone health.
Isn't it crazy, the
Like I was like,
gallbladder?
gallbladder? Like, what is that? Can you tell me more?
Right?
But even
Yes.
like the thyroid, like I knew the thyroid had an importance in the body, but to the level of how it operates with everything, like it's important. Like, so your process in helping to create more educated, I call them practitioners. I think we're more than coaches in many ways. Um, because I've done other courses that are coaching based and it's about holding space. This isn't about holding space. This is actually giving really practical tools to help women to navigate their hormone health and to get the help that they need because our scope of practice is very small. Like we can't diagnose, we can't prescribe, but we can give you the resources so you can go to those practitioners to get that information or to get that next step done. But we are kind of like that sound. What it feels like to me is I'm the sounding board for all your concerns that have been not heard and helping giving you really strategic strategies of how we can now get to the bottom of it and actually see progress and get the help that you need. So, in your
Wow,
mind,
quite.
what is the importance of a hormone health coach?
Okay, so the question is, yeah, what is the importance of a hormone health coach? I think that this is in my original sort of vision for the work that I do and the work that I have taught you and so many others now is that I really wanted us to be able to partner with doctors and other high level healthcare practitioners, specialists, things like that, to be able to complement the work that they do. That was my big goal. I know that now I look back and I think, wow, it's become very difficult to do that. There's this very wide gap between what I had envisioned and what is current reality. And I blame social media for that to some degree because I feel like we are now seeing on a very broad level how challenging mainstream medicine is. Like before, you just go to your doctor, no one would really know, you wouldn't really talk about it. And now everyone talks about it on social media about the inherent challenges with navigating the conventional medical arena. And so originally, like I said, when I first started this, I partnered with a gynecologist who was lovely. And to be fair, she was in an integrative medical center in New York. And so I would have her refer clients to me, and then I'd refer people to her, of course. And then there was this midwife who I also partnered with, and she also sent people my way. And that was how I originally envisioned this. And I do think that that is definitely happening. There's no doubt
Mhm.
about that. There is partnership happening for sure, but it is more in the unconventional realm where it's more functional medicine, uh, doctors and integrative and naturopathic doctors and other types of practitioners along those lines, chiropractors, things like that. So it's happening, and that's the ultimate goal is that we complement each other because that's really what it is, right? You go to a doctor, you have an acute situation happening. The acute situation is likely due to a chronic problem that you have, or you're experiencing a chronic problem, not an acute problem, but you need accountability, you need guidance, you need someone who's going to help you implement all of the things that the doctor might recommend or that the doctor isn't even recommending. They're just saying, okay, well, I can give you this and this, and then work with my health coach or my whatever you want to call this person, um, who is not a doctor, to address these issues that you have ongoing, or to help you figure out how to eat this way or eat better, or time your meals or get this much protein. All of these things that we all struggle with in life that we don't really want to think about too much because life is full on as it is. And so you need someone to hold your hand and advocate for you and keep you accountable. So that's like ultimately what I have always envisioned. And I think it's happening, but it's on a smaller scale than I'd originally anticipated.
And I do hope, I believe that we're on a movement for that hopefully to start happening, especially with this next generation of, people questioning things, of asking, of setting better boundaries, not even questioning, of setting better boundaries as they become the next realm of doctors, starting to say, like, I don't have time to teach nutrition, but it's important. So here's a referral, right? Like I know as
Yeah.
a yoga therapist that I was for before I took your course for the last 10 years, we were always taught, that was one of the first things that we were taught, is have your bag of referrals, right? Like here's how you can help and support, but then when it gets out of your scope, make sure you have a referral for everything. And so I think that that still can apply. Like we shouldn't rely on medical doctors to be the source of all information. In fact, I'd rather them specialize and focus on one area of interest and then know that they have people that they trust that they can refer to for these other things. And what a beautiful web that would be of support for women.
I could not agree with you more because ultimately that's really what it comes down to is that in the most ideal world, we would all have access to a team of people, and that would
Hmm.
potentially include your GP or your regular doctor, maybe a specialist, depending on whatever it is you're dealing with, a health coach, or some other kind of practitioner that's going to help hold you accountable and address the lifestyle and the challenges that come with implementing all of this stuff to help you start feeling better. And when I think about a system like that, as I said earlier, it's not available to everyone. It's in fact very available to very few people because of the financial burden that is
Hmm.
associated with getting that kind of healthcare. And so, yeah, I mean, I do think it's shifting though, and I do think that there is definitely a change in the air with regard to just women again asking questions, demanding answers, demanding better care. And so I do see a lot of doctors now making these recommendations that we would not have seen not that long ago. In fact, there was a nurse practitioner. My husband is a volunteer firefighter in our town, and so he had a physical last weekend, and then this nurse practitioner did their physicals. And he was a guy, and he was just talking about how he has so many people who need all the things that I do. So many come to him, and he's like, I don't have time to help them work through their emotional blocks around, whatever lifestyle change that I'm asking them to do. That's not really my job. And so he was asking about me and if I was working with anyone locally and could I help him. And so, yeah, like I think that when doctors see the vision, they immediately are on board
Yeah.
because they understand how we all work in congruence.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
agree.
I know.
Nicole, this conversation has been so great. I could have you on here forever. Um,
Same here,
so
girl.
thank you. Thank you for your time. And thank you for, just kind of lessening the stigma a little bit around this kind of hot conversation of like, do doctors know it all? And are they supposed to? And is it okay to question? Is it okay to break the social rules or the norms that we have for women that they should behave and act and present in a certain way when asking for help, right? And so this conversation's been really great. I'm sure so many people are going to get so much out of it. So thank you.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. And by the way, I feel like that should be the podcast title. Do doctors know it all? Because it's so true what you just said. I was just inside thinking, yes, yes, all of the above. And that we have to break the mold. We have to uh, step out of this paradigm because it has not been working for us. It is not working for us currently. And so there is a better way. There is a better path, I think, for us to take. And I'm so excited for people to hear this conversation, and hopefully it moves someone in some way that they are able to get the help that they so desperately need or have been wanting.
And in the meantime, go check out Nicole's book. It is amazing. So she has a great book called Fix Your Period. I have read it from front to back. So many highlighter marks. It's great. But it is a book that it's a resource that every woman, I think, who is struggling with their hormones and their period, just to have a better understanding of what's happening. And then you also have your Fix Your Period collective, which robust. Like, I don't know how you created this baby, but this online system to give you protocols and to help you come back into hormonal balance. And all those links will be in the show notes. But definitely check out Nicole's work if you're somebody who's like, I need answers, because you have such great resources. So,
Thank you. You're so kind. I appreciate it. I know it's been a long labor of love, as you well know with this. But yes, thank you so much again. I'm really just so grateful that you are now part of my world and that you had me on the podcast. And like I said, the goal always is for us, there's no ulterior motive. We just really want women to feel better in their bodies.
I am so excited about hormones. Like, I could talk about hormones with strangers now. It used to be that thing that I was a little scared of, and now I'm like, hey, do you want to talk about this? Yesterday at the event, everybody knew I was on day 2 of my cycle. I was like, I'm on day 2. So here we
Okay.
go.
Yeah, I know. I like created these little monsters. I love it.
All right. Well, like I said, everyone go check out the show notes for all of Nicole's links and all of the information of how you can work with her. Friends, have you had a chance to download my new free ebook? Maybe it's not you. The Truth on PMS and How You Can Take Back Control of Your Cycle is now available. This is truly a book that I think needs to be in the hands of every woman who struggles with the second half of their menstrual cycle. So if this is you, click on the link in the show notes and download your free copy today. And remember to subscribe to this podcast and share a review if you loved this episode. Until next time, remember, womb wisdom equals connection to self, which ultimately equals inspired living.